Shalom and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of Parenting Through the Parsha with Rabbi Matt Shapiro.
One of the rituals that we engage in most frequently as a family is when I offer my kids a blessing on Friday night. The first line of the blessing traditionally is different for sons and for daughters. And then the next three lines are words from this week's Parsha, from Parshat Naso. And so it makes me think, of course, very clearly and vividly about parenting and the Parsha when I see these words here this week. These words, of course, are offered in a number of different liturgical contexts. The other one that comes to mind for me is at the synagogue that I grew up in when these words were recited during the repetition of the Amidah. On holidays, the Kohanim from the community, the priests, the people who believe that they are descended from the priests in our community would come out and, prompted by the cantor with each word, offer these words of blessing to the community. And traditionally, you're not supposed to look up. You're not supposed to even peek at what's happening visually as these words of blessing are being offered, lest you have what happened at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark happen to you. And I remember I was always very careful not to look up. And then one time I looked up and I was convinced that, this isn't something I'm supposed to be doing, or this is something that is beyond what a regular old Israelite like me should be able to experience at this moment. And yet, even though seemingly almost as a non sequitur in this Parsha, in the middle of verses about the Nazir, the Nazarite, and something about a number of verses about how the tabernacle was prepared, there's these well-known verses about blessing that are specifically for the priests. But yet what has evolved in our tradition at this point is that these aren't words that are only for the priests. These are actually words that pretty much anybody can say, and often pretty much anybody does say. They can be invoked under the chuppah. They could be invoked at a number of other happy occasions and in homes like mine. And I'm sure many of yours, when on Friday night we bless our children with these words. And so it's really fascinating to note how this has moved from a highly specialized and specific ritual context into something that is not totally prosaic, but something that's much more common, a much more democratic ritual access point for us. And I think there's a really beautiful message underneath that evolution, insofar as we can think about how both everyone is worthy of blessing, right? All the Israelites are supposed to be blessed by the priests, but also that everyone has the capacity to bless. Everyone can be a vehicle, a vessel for blessing. And I think that's a really beautiful way of thinking about our capacity in the world. And when Friday night comes, since it's not always our usual rhythm, sometimes dinner's a bit later, or the school day ends earlier on Fridays, or whatever it is, it's not always the smoothest night in our home. And so there have been, yes, Friday nights where I don't particularly feel like that's a calm moment for blessing my kids. I was talking about it with a teacher and colleague a while back, and she said, that's why that moment's important, because you're supposed to take a moment that feels hectic, that doesn't feel like a naturally serene moment, and to bring an intentionality into that moment where you're seeing the fullness of who your kids are, where you're aspiring to your own highest potential as a vessel for blessing, and claiming that moment as a ritual moment. I think that that's a really beautiful idea. And we each have a really important part to play in what the concluding verse of the section says in verse 27 of chapter 6. The words of the blessing are verses 24, 25, 26. And then in verse 27, it says that they, the priests, will link my name or will place my name upon the people of Israel, and I will bless them. This context, I being God, that God will bless them because of what the priests have done. It's not that the priests themselves are putting that blessing on the people. It's that they're taking an action of goodness, of invoking something bigger than themselves. And then because they've taken the opportunity to do that, then there will be additional holiness and blessing that lands upon the people. And that's a really beautiful idea to me. That speaks to me in a really powerful way, going all the way back to our first forefather, right? When Avram is told that he will be a blessing, that when we act in this way, we are being blessings in the world because of how we're acting and making it possible for blessing to manifest itself that much more fully. And one other wrinkle here is that there's always that dance between the words that are given to us, the words that we read every day in the Siddur and the prayer book, the words that if we don't take the time to invest them with additional intentionality can become somewhat rote or formulaic. And I learned a really beautiful way of making that a bit more organic from Moradale Schatz, who I have the honor and privilege of working with in a number of our family programs. And what Moradale does is he taught me that you can prompt families with a specific sentence, right? Sort of a fill in the blank before going into parents blessing kids in terms of something that I hope for you this Shabbat is, and then encouraging parents to fill in the blank. Or if it's around Sukkot, something that I want to make sure you get through our home life together is, and then encouraging to fill in that blank. And it helps make it a little more dynamic and balances a really nice, helps balance a little bit the tension between the words that can be a little formulaic and something that can be more organic, because both are important. And so what I'd encourage you, those of you who are listening to this, to think about is, I'll offer you the prompt. One way in which I'm a blessing in the world is blank, right? To think for yourself. You can say it out loud if you like, but one way in which I'm a blessing in the world is. And so now that you've landed on that, and that you can see how you are a blessing in the world, hopefully you in turn feel empowered to offer these traditional words of blessing to whoever you want to offer them to. They might be your kids, it could be a friend, right? We all have the capacity to bring that blessing into the world. And when we do that, as we do that, that makes it possible that, like verse 27 says, that God will bring blessing that much more fully into the world as well. That when we push ourselves to see how we are blessings, we can then make it more possible for us to give blessings to others. When we see holiness in them, it also then potentially makes it more possible for us to see how we can be blessings in the world as well. Because ultimately, there is that greater source of blessing, and by focusing our attention on this idea and by trying to connect with that idea, hopefully that connects each of us more deeply and fully to the holiness and divinity that connects and blesses all of us.
You have been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast site or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information about Temple Beth Am Los Angeles, go to tbala.org.